being in a tech ecosystem, we don't have a lot of women. For me to be here is proof that women can do it, women can be leaders, and I hope to inspire other women, especially young African women, to be bold and courageous, follow their passions, and when they're offered that seat at the table, to take it and take the front seat at changing the African narrative.
Since I joined Impact Africa Network, my thinking has really been expanded. I now for sure believe that if I put my mind and time into something, I can bring life-changing ideas into fruition.
The culture at IAN encourages continual learning. This makes someone to source for outlets for learning, opportunities for growth in order to continually ensure that they do the best at their job. Also working with Mark, who has this great vision for changing the African narrative. He wants to take us on that journey with him. Pushes you to the limit, pushes you to want to be better.
My thinking has changed from looking for problems to being a solution provider. That way, I will stop worrying and actually do something.
I really enjoy being a leader and at the same time being a student. At Impact Africa Network, there's a lot of continuous learning and development. So it gives you this hunger for knowledge. It pushes you to be the best possible version of yourself, because you cannot change the African narrative being anything less.
At Impact Africa Network, we bet on the women. We believe women are much more effective at leading and nurturing complex people-centric systems, and startups are the quintessential people-centric systems of our day.
As the Women of Impact Africa Network, we will be hosting a livecast series with global female leaders and change makers, having conversations with the intent of inspiring a new generation of female leaders just like ourselves. If you or someone you know should be part of this conversation, we would love to host you. Talk to us.
You can also be a change maker by helping us create more leadership opportunities for women by donating today. IAN is a registered U.S. nonprofit charitable entity under Section 501c3.
Welcome to Part for Women, Livecast series brought to you by Impact Africa Network. We are 8 episodes in, and it's exciting as we move towards the close of the year. We've learned so much from the women we've hosted, and today we're about to give you another woman who is also phenomenal. Impact Africa Network is a nonprofit startup studio here in Nairobi on a mission to ensure that young, talented Africans participate in the digital transformation of Africa as creators and owners. And we chose to do this livecast series so that we're able to host global female business leaders and change makers so that they're able to share their stories with the intent of inspiring a new generation of female leaders in Africa. Today, I'm joined by my co-host, Joy Linda, who is going to welcome our guest of today. Joy Linda, welcome.
Hi, Phyllis. Thank you for welcoming us to the show. All our guests, thank you for making time for yet another episode. We're in number 8. Today, we are joined by a phenomenal lady, Admas. We're going to have a conversation with her about career, leadership, life in general. Admas is the head of social impacts at Github, where she leads philanthropic and CSR efforts on behalf of the company. Other than that, she has for over 15 years worked across the social sector with foundations, nonprofits, governments, and so on and so forth. She's worked at FSG, which is a nonprofit consulting firm. She has also worked for Accenture in the public sector practice. And she has degrees from Harvard, Kennedy School of Government, and Stanford University. Welcome, Admas, and thank you so much for making time to have a conversation with us today.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Joy, and thank you, Phyllis, for inviting me to speak to this incredible community with Impact Africa. I'm very, very happy to be here today.
Happy to have you too. So we'll start from the beginning. I'm sure people are curious. They're like, your name sounds familiar. Is she American? Is she Kenyan? So maybe you can start with explaining your journey. Did you start here in Africa? Did you start in the US? How did you end up in Github all those years? help us fill in the gaps. Welcome.
Yes, and there is quite a gap, and it's not a fantastical story, but it is a highly unlikely story, and I'm so happy to share it and have this opportunity to share it. So as you when I first got sort of the opportunity to speak with you both, it was really like a homecoming, and I think speaking with this community today is that. So as you can tell from my name, I am of African origin, and I am an African. I was born in Nairobi, Kenya. My father is Kenyan. My mother is Ethiopian. My first name is Ethiopian. My last name is my father's name. And, I lived there in my childhood until I was 14 before my mother immigrated to the United States with us. And, that experience of being an immigrant has really indelibly just formed every perspective that I have. I carry Kenya with me everywhere I go. I should say Kenya and Ethiopia, so I also respect my mom. But I carry them both with me everywhere I go, and it highly influences the work I do, as well as the perspectives that I share. And so after moving to the US, we moved to Los Angeles, which was a really interesting community. I think as an immigrant, we were so fortunate to land in a place like California, in a place like Los Angeles, which is really, a complete community of immigrants from all over the world. And so, while it was hard to find other Kenyans in my first few years living in the US, I definitely felt a lot of kinship with many other immigrants who also were in the same situation of trying to figure out life in a new place, trying to navigate new, different systems, trying to manage all that, and carrying, this need to represent your culture, but also learn a new one. And so I think that introduction was really, really helpful. I can only imagine if we landed somewhere else, how much harder it would have been. When I was in Los Angeles, I completed my high school studies there. And then I was fortunate to be accepted to Stanford University. And when I was at Stanford, I not only, built like the most formative and helpful relationships. All my best friends are from that time there. But I also had the opportunity to focus and study economics and international relations. I started out as pre-med, like every other African student, and then was quickly disillusioned from that path. But was very interested in international development, was very interested in economic development, was very interested in thinking about how, especially countries like Kenya, how Africa can become stronger powerhouses in the global economy. And so most of the work that I did there was really around research on a concept known then as South-South cooperation, which is trade between countries in the global South, and how that trade can actually be exponentially helpful to those systems. When I left Stanford, it was the economic downturn of 2001. So it was a really great time to be a college student and looking for a job. Actually wasn't. And I found myself actually working. I landed a small job, working for a small NGO in a neighborhood in Los Angeles called Skid Row. Now, I think for those who may not know outside of the U.S., but the U.S., for all its incredible wealth, also has significant issues in inequality and inequity, and one of the ways it plays out is in the advent of homelessness. And Skid Row at that time in Los Angeles, I think, still continues to have the reputation of being the homeless capital of the country, with over 6,000 people sleeping on the streets every day. And so I started working for the small NGO in this community focused on supporting chronic homeless individuals, helping them access housing, helping them access the services that they needed. And it was, again, a really incredible education. I ended up staying there for 6 years. It was one of these incredible nonprofits like Impact Africa that was well run, incredibly professional, but also with lots of passion and commitment to what was a really significant and pervasive social issue, and was also using really innovative practices and not only innovative practices, but also was lending those practices and influencing a wider ecosystem of change. And so while I was there, for example, we did a lot of work that led not only California, but also the country in thinking about new and different ways of addressing chronic homelessness through things like supportive housing. And it was, continues to be one of the best job I ever had in my life. After Skid Row, I decided to go to graduate school. And so that's when I, again, was fortunate to be accepted to the Kennedy School of Government. And, I think there I fully expected to, gain new skills and go right back to Skid Row. That was where my heart was. I knew that I was going to stay working directly with the community, and that's all I wanted to do forever. But while I was in grad school, I think I got challenged to think about, as you work in a nonprofit, on one hand, you're able to see the change right in front of your eyes. But what is often difficult is you're working in a situation where your resources are constrained. It's hard to be strategic because the needs are extremely urgent. You're nimble and flexible, but it's hard to stay the path because you're often so resource constrained. And so I started to think about, are there other ways to do social impact work that allow you to be able to get to scale, that allow you to think strategically because you have the opportunity to, and allows you also to be able to address, to bring all these other pieces around infrastructure together. And so I actually got challenged by one of my best friends to consider consulting. She was like, well, you worked in Skid Row. You're a problem solver. I'm sure you can solve any business problems. And so I went into consulting, and that's how I landed at the Accenture Public Service Practice. And at that point, we were focusing on all kinds of public service organizations or public sector organizations, mostly the federal government, but also we opened a practice focusing on nonprofits specifically. And it was, again, all kinds of nonprofits, from educational institutions to arts institutions to international development aid organizations to small local nonprofits. And, consulting was a very, very helpful frame to look at all these problems, because on one hand, you had the opportunity to focus on things like strategy and infrastructure. You had the opportunity to borrow lessons from across different actors in the ecosystem, and also, just gain a lot of different skills and perspectives by working through with a lot of different clients. After leaving Accenture, I decided, actually, I was on the East Coast for a long time. My family was still back in California, so I decided to move back to California. And that's when I joined FSG, which is a nonprofit consulting firm. And at FSG, I focused in a couple of areas. One around community engagement, and got to do a lot of really fascinating work around how we can get community actors to collaborate together to address a significant social issue. And then in my last few years at FSG, I started working on companies and thinking about companies and their role in society. And, and that was really new and different to me as well, because I think at that point, I'd spent all my career really focusing in the nonprofit sector, in the public sector. I, like many others, felt like companies are the reason why we're in this mess in the first place. And, it was, I think, a bit of a spiritual journey to get there, in terms of seeing the opportunities, potential, and power that companies can have in making a difference in the world and in society today. And I got to expose to really powerful ideas like shared value, the idea that a company, if it finds that intersection between business and social value, can make a difference on a social problem at scale. We also started to do work around how companies can think about racial equity, which is so pertinent today, especially here in the U.S., as many companies and actors across the system are being called to action around racial justice, and started to see companies as, again, this one place where there's a lot of power, there's a lot of resources, there's a lot of potential. And if there are people like me that can influence, those decisions, we can use that power and those resources to make real change for the communities that we all care about. And so through FSG, I landed at Github, and it was an opportunity to do that work in-house for a company. And so I've been with the company for a little less than 3 years to date. And, very continue to be committed to the idea that companies can make a difference in the world. And I can talk a little bit later about a number of ways in which we do that. So I'll stop there.
That was actually something I wanted to dwell on a bit more in terms of helping, and you've done a good job in trying to understand and help us and the audience understand what social impact entails. But one of the things, and I think in our market, they don't necessarily call it social impact, they call it something else, but it stands for the same things, giving back. But one of the things that most impactful organizations struggle with is how to access social impact programs. Because I can speak for us in terms of the work we do, we've received a lot of good support from individuals, especially in the Valley, which is fantastic, but not much in the social impact sector. And that's something I'll ask, how can we work better to access that, to access some form of assistance from social impact programs?
Yeah.
Pretty much.
I will acknowledge that I think that, companies are really early in their journey in social impact. I mean, compared to the social sector, for example, right? CSR as a concept, or, giving back as a concept really started at companies, less than, I think, 50 or 60 years ago. And, was very much focused on traditional philanthropy. And, as what we've seen really in the last 20 years is a real, hopefully, like sophistication in how companies are starting to think about their footprint in society, especially as a result of the sustainability movement, the ESG movement, for example. Now, I think that one of the reasons I say companies are still very nascent here is that, and this is something that, I think I am constantly struggling with, is trying to understand the knowledge, expertise, and true assets that are out there in the social sector. One of the reasons why I maligned companies so much in the past is because I felt that they always wanted to solve problems on their own, and they always felt like they had all the good solutions and all the answers. And as somebody who's worked in the social sector, you know that no one can solve anything by yourself, that you need actors from across the system, that there is knowledge, even if it's not the knowledge that you have, but the knowledge or that you recognize, that there is real knowledge, there's real expertise that's sitting especially in communities, and that your role is to be able to braid that and braid those relationships together. And I think companies are really early in understanding that concept. And I think that's probably why you're facing some of these challenges. Now, I think that companies are opening up to that. I think that that's becoming a bigger and bigger imperative for companies. How do you connect to local communities? How do you connect to local systems? How do you better understand what is happening in communities versus just sort of imposing from afar or from HQ? But I think they're still very, very early in that journey. And I think that's my hope, is that I can influence them to be able to open up their apertures much, much more.
I think that takes me back. Sorry, Joy, I see you unmuted. Maybe to explain, and I think you tried attempting to explain how social impact actually works, like on a day-to-day basis. How does it work? explain to me in layman's language. Yeah.
Yes, yes. Well, I can talk a little bit about sort of like our work, and then hopefully that can be illustrative. And it's one model. It's not the only one, but I think it's pretty common. So, often social impact sits as a team or a group or a function within a company. You will see it sit in a number of different places. We actually sit within the legal organization. So GitHub is a Microsoft company, and similar to Microsoft, we have organized most of the work that happens, especially around philanthropy, sustainability, that is government relations, sits within a group called Corporate and External Legal Affairs. And so we sit within that group. Social impact teams or CSR teams can sit in a number of different places across the organization. I've seen them in marketing organizations. I've seen them in human resources organizations. I've even seen them within product groups, for example. But again, it's not to say that one way of arranging this is better than the others, but there are just many models out there, and they yield different results. And so we sit within the legal group. I like it because I think that first we are very much we have really great sponsorship, but also we sit within a group that is focused on what is the company's role in society. What is the company? How does the company move outside of the company walls? How do we, influence systems, governments, etc.? And so to sit within a group that is constantly thinking about that, we feel very much like kindred spirits with our, legal colleagues. So that's sort of the first thing, is where social impact teams are placed within a company. And then it comes to sort of like what is your strategy and what you're trying to accomplish. And, we think, with GitHub, what we try to focus on is how we can leverage the full assets of the business for social good. We know the company can give money. That's great. We know the company can give products. That's great. But we know that there are many other assets throughout the business that can be leveraged for social good, not just those two. And so our efforts are like, how can we unlock those opportunities really throughout the business? And so our strategy is really focused in three key areas. The first area, which is really what we think of as our sort of signature initiative, is what we call Tech for Social Good. And that work is, how are we leveraging GitHub's technology, its products, its technical expertise, its access to the open source ecosystem for social good. And I have an incredible colleague who does that work and is connecting GitHub and its products and its engineers and its communities to social good organizations, and thinking about the ways in which GitHub's technology and its products can make a change for those organizations. And I think that area really arrives at this like perfect like intersection between the business and social good. So that's our first portfolio. Our second portfolio is, I think, where we see most of our giving or giving back, which is our employee giving and volunteering work. So employees and even tech employees, to my surprise, I was very surprised by this, are incredibly passionate about giving back. And in addition to that, this is not only sort of a competitive advantage for the company in terms of, really attracting employees, but, even the employees that are at GitHub are just very passionate about giving back in many ways. We're actually in a giving campaign right now in the month of December. And that work is all about how we can activate employees to give back to the communities in which they live and work. And then our last portfolio is what we call the tech pipeline, which is all about how can we create access and opportunity at GitHub or through GitHub for the many communities that we know that are underrepresented in technology. And in that work, what we have taken is a very like equity focused view on trying to say, what are the populations that face the highest barriers to employment, and what can we do to help assist them on that journey? And so that work involves like, how are we leveraging, skilling programs, how are we giving folks opportunities, to how are we influencing also the company. And in GitHub, also like many companies, is starting to realize the ways in which we have, traditionally set up the system has locked out so much incredible talent. And so we are able to influence the company in thinking about also what are the internal systems that we have in place that are preventing us from tapping the best talent, but also tapping underrepresented talent in places where we haven't looked before. And so, one of the things, like, for example, at GitHub, you don't need a college degree to work at GitHub. It's not a requirement in any job description. Because your skills are more important than where you went to school. And so that's just sort of one example of the work that we do there, but, also happy to go deeper. So that's our strategy. And our work is really, how we can implement and activate those strategies and then bring them to scale. And we do that with a couple of different approaches. We do that with, the company's philanthropy. So that's, dollars. GitHub, comparatively to like many of the big companies, doesn't give away a lot of money, but gives away some money every year. We do that a lot through our products. We do that a lot through engaging in the open source ecosystem or with open source communities, especially in our Tech for Social Good work. Yes, and we do that particularly even with leveraging employees and employee talent and expertise in some ways. So that's a little bit about the kinds of like what we do as well as how we do it at the same time. So I'll stop there.
That's actually really, really incredible. You've said a few points that I resonate with, and I'm sure the folks at Impact Africa do resonate with too. I love your point about tapping raw talent. Like you don't need a college degree to, be at GitHub, for example. One of the things we believe in Impact Africa Network is sort of the same thing, because we have our fellows coming at a very young age, some before they even graduate. Two of them actually graduated this week. Shout out to Ian and Ezekiel. This is your congratulatory message. So what I'm trying to say is, we've seen the effect of taking in raw talent, young people who are just passionate and ready to work, which is, I believe you guys have seen the same thing. So it's good to see we are on the same radar. And I love also that your employees are passionate about giving, and the fundraiser in me is just itching to ask how we can get how we can get into that kind of giving. Because as of course we are set up as a non-profit, so we get our funds through philanthropic capital. So backstage, I think I will ask you how to get into that. Yes, and the last point is, you mentioned companies need to really sit back and think about their role in society, as opposed to just having traditional philanthropy, which is what we are used to here in Africa. So I think that's something they could, and the young innovators are also setting up companies. So this is something they can think about as they create their own companies, how to have shared value, and between business and social good. So that is good. Before we move on to the next question, I would just like to remind the audience that they can ask Admas any questions. Her Twitter handle is at Admas Kan. Please feel free to tweet her and ask her any questions. If you're watching from YouTube, just typing into the comment section, we'll be able to see. Even on Facebook, just typing into the comment section, we will be able to see your questions and ask Admas in the end of this broadcast. Yes, now moving on, Admas. I know working in Silicon Valley has its wins, and I'm just curious of the opposite. What are some of the challenges you've had working in Silicon Valley over the years, especially, of course, as a woman?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm constantly reminding people that I'm not of tech, that I'm just a visitor here. But I think after 3 years, I think I have to acknowledge that I am part of that ecosystem. I think the challenges that I faced are very similar to I think what many other women have faced in the tech industry, which is a male-dominated industry. I think that the one that is most salient to me, and I sort of touched a little bit upon it before, is just the idea that of like constantly proving your value and your expertise. So I'm not a developer or engineer, and on one hand, I think that is was a little bit of a detriment to my experience in Silicon Valley, because there is that insider culture that is very hard to penetrate if you are not trained as a developer or as an engineer. But then also, I can only imagine that even if I was an engineer, that even women who do have those skills also are locked out of this insider culture. And so that even would have probably not have been enough. And so I think that one of the biggest ways that it's manifested is, just, starting to really demonstrate sort of the value of that knowledge that is outside of the tech industry is one big challenge that I face all the time. So I was trained as a consultant, right? And part of my consulting training was really around how do you look out across the ecosystem and the landscape and take lessons from others. And while I think that there is a lot of learning that is espoused in tech, a lot of learning only happens within that bubble. And so as I was I'm all constantly bringing up examples from manufacturing and retail and from pharmaceuticals. In the beginning, it was very, very hard to really convince others of models and frameworks that did not come from the tech industry. And I think that part of it is because there's this like incredible hubris that all the knowledge we have is here, and it's only here, and it's nowhere else, and it's here. Whereas what tech misses out is on the incredible knowledge that is really across different industries, the incredible opportunity to learn even from examples that are not necessarily analogous, that can give you insight and that can give you awareness. And so that has been a big challenge for me, is just really getting them to understand that that the knowledge exists outside of the tech bubble, and that knowledge is valuable and worth it.
Absolutely, you're absolutely right, and I can totally relate, because most of the time I usually find myself in tech circles, and I have to remind them, I didn't go to tech school, but I know
I
one
know
or two
things.
things.
Yeah, I know things.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting. And speaking of tech and non-tech, one of our audiences, Naomi, has a question. She says, I've always known GitHub to be a platform where engineers get to share their coding work with one another. How do you get the employees to stand up and move towards social impact?
Mm. I would say that I don't have to do a lot. And as I was saying, that, employees are incredibly passionate already. And what my role is how can I channel those passions into something, and to give employees a way to, channel those passions and those the need to want to make a social impact. So, one example that I can think of is, employees are incredibly motivated about nonprofits in their own local communities. I find out all the time that employees have been volunteering for their local library for the last 15 years and never told anybody, for example, or have been giving to a local nonprofit in their community for a long time and serving on its board. And so my role is, how do I take that incredible early energy? How do I reward that energy? How do I think about company programs that help deepen the impact of the work that they're already doing in the community? And so one example is that we have a gift match program where if employees are really excited about donating, the company will match you, and the company will match you up to $15,000 a year, which is one of the highest matches across the tech industry. And so that is one way in which we can help employees improve, activate their passions and deepen the impact of the work that we do. We're also starting to think about other ways that we can help equip employees to be better, social actors. And so, how do we help them with things like board training? How do we teach them how to fundraise for their nonprofit that they care about? How do we give them opportunities to, and this is something else we're also working on, is that, our employees are also, want to spend their time and energy and their expertise on issues that are impacting the social sector. And so, one example is that we're starting a skills-based volunteering program so employees can, donate their technical expertise to nonprofits as yet another way that they can give back. And so, yeah, I often find that the work is not sort of convincing employees. They're already there. The work is around how can I activate them and amplify and then deepen the impact that they're already making through the company.
I can't go without asking, in terms of the company history and what you're looking at, does your social impact in whatever angle, whether the employees or from where you see it, look at markets outside of the US? Because that's some other things that I find people box themselves into their immediate surrounding. And you spoke about something, I think when you were doing undergraduate, you were looking at how you can still be connected to your motherland. I want to know whether that's something that you are championing GitHub or GitHub generally is doing.
No, absolutely. I often acknowledge that even though I'm African born, I haven't worked in Africa for, since I was 14. So, I'm not, I understand that a lot of my professional experiences have been very US centric and US formed. And so I sort of acknowledge that as a, as a bias, as a very normal bias that comes into my work. And so I'm constantly asking folks to challenge that bias in many, many ways so that, GitHub wants to be a global company. I mean, it's a small company right now, but its aspirations are to grow. Our community on GitHub is global, and that we are now seeing, incredible and exponential growth by our community outside of the US and Europe. And so it's become not just a nice to do, it's become a business imperative for GitHub to really think about its reach and its scale and its footprint outside of the US and even outside of Europe. And so there are a number of ways that that's happening. And again, it's really, really started to get into gear in this past year. I think a big piece of that is localization of our product and how that needs to really happen across all these new geographies that we are now seeing are being supported on the platform. We are now seeing a big energy around how we can invest in Africa, knowing that that we've had they've been visits to get to Africa by GitHub employees for the last 4 or 5 years. Our CEO actually went, I think, 2 years ago to sort of get a sense of the open source community and was so excited about it. And so now there are plans around international expansion. I think especially in Nigeria, sort of like our first hub, and thinking about more work to happen, especially in Nairobi and South Africa as sort of the 2 other big hubs that we see in our OS community. And so, I think that to me is really exciting. And I think I have a personal goal and I have a sort of personal imperative for that work to happen and for me to come to GitHub, to come to Nairobi with GitHub. And so, one of the ideas that my team was playing with before the pandemic is, should we try to do a social impact conference in Nairobi? Because Nairobi is also this incredible hub for social impact work, especially across the UN organizations that are doing work on the ground in Africa. And so in addition to being an incredible tech hub and has all these amazing elements that can really braid together the work that we're doing around, bringing technology and impact, using it as a tool for impact on social problems. And so, I think all to say is that, there's more to be done. And I am really, really happy that I am sitting where I'm sitting so that I can influence that to happen even more. And that I think my challenge is that I need to help lead that work. I need to sort of make it happen. And that's my own personal challenge over the next few years.
That is great. I'm happy to hear that coming from you. And I mean, I'm here putting Impact Africa on the front line, saying that you can look at us as local partners when you're starting to do the things in, especially in Nairobi. And I can't go without mentioning that, that your co-founder, Scott Chacon, was with us last year. I think I mentioned it to you.
Yes,
He did our first Power Speaker series where we hosted him. He spoke to about 300 and something young people at a local university. And it was amazing for them to get to see someone else who's been in that journey and they've learned. At this point, Naomi has another question that I think is very interesting and we can't go without asking. She asks, how have you been able to bring your cultures, Ethiopian and Kenyan, and your whole self to work every day at GitHub?
Yeah, no, that's really important. Well, I think that when we talk about bringing our whole self to work, it's always a, it's a negotiation. I think that before GitHub and when I was early in my career, and as an immigrant, I think that one of the things that you learn as almost like a self-protective mechanism is to try to blend in. You want to blend in, you want to assimilate. As you can tell, my accent is assimilated. But then I also realized very early in my journey about how my story, my culture, my journey is a superpower, and that it's an incredible asset. And so, I lead constantly with my story. I lead constantly with my story of being an immigrant to this new country, of the struggles of what that was like, of being raised by a single mother. And, all those pieces of my personal story are so important to the work that I do. They are the motivations for why I do this work. And they're also very important for people to know who I am and how to work with me. And so I think that, constantly telling your story, constantly sharing, your elements of your culture all the time, I think is an important piece of doing that. But it takes time. I will say that it took me a long time to get comfortable with that because of, I think the ways in which sometimes we're made to feel, the ways in which we are sometimes othered because we, come from a different place, have a different perspective, speak differently, in high school, when I came to American high school, the first thing that, that I did was change my accent. Like in a year it was gone, and in a year I stopped spelling color with an O and a U. Like in a year it was just gone, and part of that was this, I think just this very natural way of just wanting to protect yourself, especially when you feel like you are in hostile territory. But over time, I think, especially through college and through my early career, realized that all of these things are incredible assets and they're not deficiencies. And if anything, they make me more powerful as a leader in my role today.
Amazing.
I think those are very incredible points you brought out. And my favorite point is our stories and journeys are our superpowers. Those are what that pushes us to, be better and motivates us to, rise above. So that's a very incredible point. So, like any other startup environment, Impact Africa has both tech and non-tech stuff. And I like that one of the ladies in the audience, Evelyn, asked, how were you able to adapt in a tech field, seeing as your background is not in the tech industry? She would really
Yeah, no,
appreciate some
absolutely. Gosh, yeah. I mean, I'm constantly adapting every day. I think that one thing is that I'm trying to, I think one, always acknowledge what I don't know, but then also just relish in the opportunity to be a learner and a novice at some things. And it was a while, I've been in my career for almost 20 years. And so going to a job where I had to learn new things was difficult. But I think one of the things I really appreciated was just, this like lovely feeling, which I hadn't had since I was in school, of trying to understand something new and different. And so I think I would say, relish that. Don't be afraid of it. Don't be afraid of of your naivete on some topics. When I'm sitting with like the product teams or engineering teams, I mean, it's just they're speaking Greek to me. But I try to, I try to sort of put aside that uncomfortable feeling and really try to remember what it's like to be a learner again, and what it's like to learn and understand new things. And then, I've tried to, I've learned a few things since in these last 3 years of, about tech that I just would have never known before. And so, yeah, just acknowledging that it's uncomfortable, but there is, you can find some joy, especially if you remember what it's like to be a learner. Mm-hmm.
Exactly. Those are some of the points we emphasize at Impact Africa Network. Learn new things, get out of your comfort zone all the time.
Yeah.
And don't be afraid. Yeah, don't be afraid. Ask those questions. Yes.
Yeah.
Admas, I know you've held different leadership positions in different places, starting, with your own consulting firm, Accenture, and now GitHub. And my question is, has being a woman influenced your leadership style?
Of course. I think I would find it very hard to separate being a woman from how I lead. I think one of the things that is really helpful about being a woman as a leader is that I think a lot about intuition and awareness, and how to see things that are invisible, how to make the invisible visible. And I think that is one of the things that I think influences me a lot about being a woman, because being a leader as a woman, because, as a woman, you move through life, I think constantly aware of how you're being perceived, constantly trying to understand others, constantly, trying to better navigate, all these systems and structures and barriers that are around us. And as I said before, our stories are superpowers. I think this is another superpower that is honed in women. As a result, our intuition and our awareness is so deep. And so I think that's one of the ways that it's manifested as a leader. And I think some of the feedback that I've received even from like my bosses is like, wow, Admas, I didn't see that, but you could see that. And I think that, part of that is, developing, deep practices around reflection, deep practices around awareness, deep practices around looking deeper to get to like the deeper truth of something versus reacting at, what is at the surface level. And I think that's a superpower that women have. Some men have it, but I think women, many and most women have this superpower. And if we could activate it in our roles, we could be even more powerful.
Wow. 46 minutes in, time has really gone. I think we've spent time understanding GitHub, and I can tell people in our team are really excited about the possibilities of GitHub. I must mention, I think our CEO has just reminded us in the comment section, we have history. Our first donor was actually Scott Chacon, one of our first donors. So there's history. And as we look to winding up here, people came here to hear you, to learn from you, but also to learn from the work that GitHub does. I can't go without asking, what is Admas doing in your role now, heading social impact at GitHub, to ensure that you're growing, that you're continuing to develop as a leader, but also as a leader, particularly in social impact? What are you doing? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I'm constantly, I think this comes from, again, like my consulting training, is that I'm constantly reading, constantly reflecting, constantly, and, keeping track of industry trends. The other thing that I think really helps deepen my learning is that I am in relationship with other women leaders in the same role. And so one of the most powerful, learning opportunities I had was to join a very informal group of women social impact leaders at companies, and it has been one of the most fruitful experiences. And so these informal relationships that you can make with other folks who are also experiencing the same things that you're experiencing, and communities, they can serve as really a great, not just a place of support, but also a place of learning. And so I'm constantly learning through that group. of, what mistakes folks have made, how they've dealt with challenges, very similar challenges. And so that's really critical. I think the other piece that I do every year is that, this is also what's happening right now at the end of the year, is I go and I reconnect with like the old people that I've worked with that I really respect and that that had served as mentors to me at a time in my life. And, I think that's the other thing that I'm really realizing as I get older. Staying in relationship is so important, and that relationships can serve even as a great teaching tool, and that the communities, both formal and informal, that we build around ourselves are really like what propel us forward. And so, I try to be intentional about that at the end of every year, making those connections again, so that, I can both, learn what people are doing and then also get influenced by what they're doing and share what I'm doing too.
That is great. You've mentioned a point, and we are almost done here, about mentorship, something that you have kept close, which is something that we really encourage. But now that we are speaking to you and we're speaking to GitHub, I think one of the most amazing things that would happen to, I think, the fellows at Impact Africa Network, and I'm speaking on their behalf on a public forum, is if they had a chance to interact, especially with people in the GitHub space. And we can talk about this later, but this would be amazing. One of those exchanges, especially in person. But we can talk about this later. I think that would be amazing because engineering experience is something that we are growing in, and it's very important to the things that we're building. And that would be a wonderful opportunity for young people. I don't have anything else on our end. I don't think we have another question from our audience. Today has been very engaging. I must tell you, people are very excited from our team, from what I've seen, and happy to have heard from you. Joy, anything else?
I think we have just some comments from the audience. They are really resonating with your point on continuous learning, which is critical for growth. Jolan Smith is also relating to your story. She says it's such an inspirational personal story, especially many children in the U.S. Schools are immigrants and are English language learners. When they do feel the need to assimilate to the American culture, and she's glad that that is your superpower, and many people just highlighting that we need to keep planning and be adaptable. And Michael is looking forward to that GitHub conference in Nairobi. So we hope it happens. Evelyn is really excited about you coming to Nairobi, so we really hope that happens. And before we close, this is a question we always ask every lady. What is the challenge you're leaving for the next generation of female leaders behind you?
Well, I'm sorry that we didn't fix the world for you all. I think that's the most important thing, is that we should have fixed it. But, hopefully we will make it a little better before leaving it to you. I think maintaining relationships and the value of relationships, I think, is the most important. The challenge is that, we have so many distractions. We have so many pervasive barriers towards us as women, no matter where we are in the world. But we can find not just sort of support, but also sponsorship and help by staying in relationship with each other. And so I think that's just really critical. I have incredible relationships, both personal and professional, with women. And I think that they influence everything that I do and the lenses that I take into my work. I also come from a line of firstborn daughters, and I have a firstborn daughter too. And I also think that, our connection to the ancestors is constantly speaking through us. And so, I think as we think about the next generation, that, that importance of maintaining relationships in all the chaos, in all the, distraction that life leads us, I think is one that I would leave with the group.
Absolutely right. And one of our speakers in the last few weeks also mentioned the importance of the same. That women sometimes we just really fight each other when we're not supposed to be fighting, but growing each other. So that's an absolutely great point and a very, very good way to end the show tonight. But I will not end without mentioning that Impact Africa Network is a nonprofit startup studio committed to changing the African narrative, and we firmly believe that women are critically important in this mission. We are committed to providing women leadership positions in the startups and scale-ups that span out of the studio. And to support our work, you can join our micro donations program that is for as little as $20-30 a month. You can be part of this exciting movement towards creating a new African future, and you can support our young fellows as they develop the next big solutions for our continent and beyond. I think it's been great and an inspiring night. Our audience, thank you for always making time every Friday. You guys make our Fridays. We are always looking forward to these conversations. Admas, thank you so much for making time, and we hope to see you in person in Nairobi soon.
Yes.
Or
Yes.
in Silicon Valley, whichever
Oh
way.
yeah, or we could come over there.
Yeah.
So
Let's plan to do both. Let's plan to do both. We will
Definitely.
host you,
Definitely.
and you will
Definitely.
host me.
yeah.
That's great.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you and good night, everybody.
Thank you.